In the second part of our demonstration on how Viking actually fits together, what we're going to look at is not only how the main modules interact with one another, but how they're affected by the level of access that you have. And what we'll also do is we'll look at some of the administrative functions that enable you to set these levels of administration and access to the system in general. So what I've got on the screen are two logins, one by a person, Uma user, who has a low level of access, and the other, Angela Adminson, who is an administrator. And what we're going to do first and foremost is log an incident with Uma and see how that is viewed by someone like Angela. Now, before we even start, you can see that they're logged into the same environment, but they see completely different things. And the reason for this is that Uma has been limited to only seeing information on the Mount Bryant site. Now, this is something that gets set up in the administrative section, and it gets carried through into what is shown on the dashboard. Angela, on the other hand, is an administrator, and she sees absolutely everything. So what we'll do is we'll start by having a look at what a user will see when they log an incident report. And bear in mind, when you're logging an incident report, you can do this on the mobile app as well. Now, the mobile app, while we won't go through it here, what the mobile app gives you is the ability to lodge pretty much anything that you have as a module down the left-hand side on the laptop. And there's simple configurations available in the administrative section to allow the module to appear on the mobile app. The mobile app as well is something that works online and offline. So if you happen to be out away from internet connectivity, you can lodge an incident, a hazard, etc. And when you get back into internet connectivity zone, you can get back onto the app and it will automatically synchronize whatever you did previously. So we'll just move this out of the way for now and have a look at lodging things and managing things on the laptop. So what we're going to do is, first and foremost, get into the incident reporting module. And the first thing we're going to do is click on New Record. So this is the first step. And because it's the first step, the status of the incident is draft. Now, Uma is going to log this particular incident report. And the idea behind myosh, or the philosophy anyway, is to give the people lodging the incident reports as little to do as necessary. What we don't want to try and do is give them reams and reams of information to fill out, which ultimately discourages the lodging of further incident reports. So if we scroll down, you can see that really there's about an A4 page of information that you can fill out. Now, this is the minimum that you need to fill out before you send this off to somebody else. However, what we've done for this demonstration, in order to illustrate what myosh is capable of, is we have allowed additional information to be entered by a person who is simply lodging the incident. And this additional information is something that you as an administrator can control. If you don't want people to lodge this, you can switch this functionality off, and we'll see how we can do that in a moment. Okay, so to avoid you suffering through my typing skills, what I've done is I've filled in some information about the location and the brief description of the incident. And as we scroll down, what you'll notice in the classification section is that you are able to lodge a fairly complex incident report. What we've got up here is the bus that's been damaged, we've got 2 people injured, and we've got an environmental issue. So what we're able to do here is we're able to say there's an injury, there's a problem with a vehicle, and we've also had an environmental issue. Now, what this enables you to do is lodge all of these things in the same event, the same document, multiple incident types. Was a third party involved? Well, yes, in this case, probably the delivery driver. But what I've done for this demonstration is I've added in some additional fields that relate to buses so that you can see how easy it is to do this. So what we'll do in this instance is we'll say no to the third party. And in fact, if this was a decision you wanted to make, you could in fact remove this entire section. There's no need to actually have the third party section in there, and it's very, very simple to remove. And again, we'll see this in a moment. So we scroll down, we have a look at the details, and in the details section, we have to add some information about what actually happened in this incident. So what we've done now is we've added some incident details, and you'll notice also that some of these fields have these little red asterisks next to them. This indicates that they are mandatory, and again, you can determine which fields are mandatory and which not. I've put in some information about witnesses. These are free text fields. You can just put in any names you want. The internal witnesses, this will come from a list of your employees. You can tick whichever names you want. And now we come to a section that has appeared as a result of what we've selected in the classification. Now, we'll just scroll back up a moment. I mentioned earlier that what you're able to do in this section here is you're able to tick any combination of classifications so that you can lodge a really complex event. But what you can also do is you can limit what the person lodging the incident actually sees. Now, in order to illustrate this, what we've done is we have enabled the section for injury and vehicle to appear when a user lodges something. But you might decide that this is far too much information for a person lodging an incident to fill in, and you might want to prevent that from happening. So if we drop down to the injury report, what we now have is this section that's appeared, and we can now log a new injury, and we'll go ahead and do that. So the injury form opens up. Probably don't need the date occurred. We already know what date it occurred. We'll just add it in here. The person involved. Now, at the moment, in this particular demonstration, we only have a list of people who actually work for us. But depending on the affiliation, and in this case, what we also don't have is bus drivers or passengers of buses. But let's say we are doing this for the bus driver. We could say he was an employee. Now, we could rearrange this form so that affiliation was at the top, and based on the value that gets selected here, if we selected employee, then the drop-down list of the people who are our employees will appear. But if we had another field or another option that said passenger, what we would have instead of a drop-down list is a free text field where you could enter the passenger's name. In injury classification, again, we've got different types. So let's say in this case, the person had a first aid injury, and the nature of the injury, these are simply keywords that you can change, was maybe a sprain or a strain. Bodily location, we'll say the neck. You can, of course, select as many as you want. Where did the injury occur? What happened? These are all hints in the field, and these hints are things that you can configure. And when you click on the line, what happens is the hint disappears, and you can then type in the information. It's fairly standard navigational assistance in a website. So we'll put some details into each one of these fields. Some are mandatory, some are not. And then down the bottom, what we've got is the name of the person who, or the people who are actually assigned as injury managers, people who can investigate injuries. And you can select whichever one you want. So we'll send this off to maybe Andy and submit the document. And when we submit the document, it closes the injury document, but what it does inside the incident is it now creates a table in the injury report section. And what you can see here is the details of the first injury that you've lodged. Now, if there's another injury, you simply click Log New Injury. And what will happen is this table will then grow for the number of injuries that there are. And when you come to report on these injuries, frequency rates, etc., if you have a first aid injury, a medical treatment injury, and a lost time injury, all in the same event, what the system does not do is take the most serious and put that in the stats. What it will do is it will take all of the different injury types and add them to the statistics. Now, in similar fashion, vehicle details, because again, and we'll scroll up just one more time, because again, what we did is we selected, if you remember, vehicle details and environment. In vehicle details, what we've got are some basic fields that we quickly added before this demo that relate to buses. Now, none of these are mandatory. Don't have to fill these in. I've got a field here that is mandatory. Did the service manager attend? If I click yes, I have to put in a truck number. If I click no, I don't have to do anything, but I have to click yes or no. What I also have to do is select a vehicle. And because I've got the vehicle register as part of my solution, what I can do is I can click select, and from the result, which sadly only contains one vehicle, what I can do is I can click on this vehicle and it will show me the details of the vehicle, which I can then scroll through to ensure that it's the correct vehicle. I can also resize this window. And once I'm happy that this is the vehicle that I'm dealing with, I can tick it, click Add Selected, and Submit. And what it will do is it will now add that vehicle to a table of vehicles involved in this incident. So if I had multiple vehicles and hopefully had more vehicles in my vehicle register, I could add to this list of vehicles and have as many vehicles as were involved listed here. And then I can, if I want to go and look at them, all I do is I click on the link and open the document. And there it is. Right, so what we've done is we've lodged an incident, we've put in some details about the injury, we've put in some details about the vehicle. Notice though that even though we selected environment as a classification at the top, there is no environment section here. Now I've left that out simply because it is a huge amount of information to put in for the environment section, and we don't want the person who lodges the incident to have to go through all of that. Now, to show you just briefly, we'll just digress a little and go and have a look at the administration section to see how simple it is to add these sorts of fields, route, run, estimated speed, into the incident module to customize the myosh incident module for a particular type of industry. So what we'll do is we'll just make this full screen temporarily, and we'll shrink this page. And now what we've got is user UMA on the right hand side looking at the form that we were just reviewing. And on the left hand side, I'm logged in as an administrator looking at the design of the form that UMA is looking at. Now what we can do with both UMA and the designer is we can collapse the sections. So we'll do that. And what we'll do is we'll go into the vehicle details section and have a look at the fields that are there. Route, run, estimated speed, etc. And we'll do exactly the same in the design. So what we've got here are fields that were added in order to make this appear as a solution for an organization that runs buses. So if we look at some of these fields, we can see here we've got the street of the accident, the suburb, and here they are here. And I've decided that what I need to do is add in the postcode. So what I can do is I can grab one of these field types down the left-hand side and put it onto the form. Now there are a number of different field types. We're going to take a basic single line text field that seems appropriate. And we think that the best place for this would probably be after the nearest cross street. So we'll drop it in there. It says, all right, well, what's the field name? So we'll say it's a postcode. We can add some field help in here if we need to. We can put in a default value, although probably not appropriate, and we can make it mandatory or not mandatory. And if we click OK, what it does is it adds the postcode over here to the list of fields in the vehicle details. Now it doesn't appear here yet. We might think, well, actually that's not the right place for postcode, so we'll put it up there. We've decided that's the best place for it to be, so what we'll now do is we'll save our form. So we'll click Save down here. Once it's saved, it doesn't automatically appear on this form that UMA's looking at, because UMA's actually looking at the form on the browser. The browser hasn't refreshed the fact that we've now added a field. The next time that she comes to look at a form, that field will be available. So what I'll do now is I'll just save her form. Then what I'll do is I'll log back out and log in again and reopen the form, which I've now done. And when I scroll down into that vehicle details section, what I now have is a postcode field. So it's very easy to add in these fields as you require them. If we go back and we have a look at that incident form again, over in the designer area, you can also see these little crosses. And what the crosses enable you to do is delete the fields that you no longer require. So if postcode isn't required anymore, you simply click on the cross and remove it. And there it's gone. And once again, save the form and the information will no longer be there. Right, well, let's get back to UMA lodging this incident report. What we've done is we've filled in all of the information, and what we now need to do is send this information to somebody who's going to investigate it. And the drop-down list will be a list of people whom you have configured as people capable of investigating an incident in that particular area of your operations. So we'll send this off to Angela. We can attach any number of files that we like here. There is no limit, and we'll submit the document. You'll notice that when I hover over the button, a little pop-up of information tells me what the button actually means, or what's going to happen once I click on the button. And again, that's button help that you can configure. Right, so that's the end of UMA user's part in the process. She's lodged the incident report, and now what we're going to do is review what happens to it when someone receives a notification and deals with it. And bear in mind that notifications are things that you can configure. Even though we provide standard notifications with the product, what you can do is you can build in new notifications or modify the existing ones. So what I've now done is I've removed UMA user, and I'm now logged in as Angela Adminson, and she is the person to whom UMA sent the notification or the lodgement of that incident. So it's now up to Angela to investigate that. Now what Angela is able to do is simply click on this little number over here, and what this does is lists all of the incidents that have been assigned to her. And here's the one that she's just been sent: bus hit by delivery van. So we'll click on that to have a look. We'll just resize the window a little bit and click on edit. Now, as the person investigating, what I can see is everything that UMA lodged for me. I can see her injuries that she lodged. I can see the details of the vehicle that she lodged. If I want to click on it, I can go and have a look at it. But now that I've come down to the environmental impact details, you can see why it was that I didn't want UMA to fill all of this in. It's an enormous section. Now, it's an enormous section because we've configured it to be an enormous section, and originally this was created for an oil and gas organization who require an awful lot of information. This can be tailored to suit your organization simply by removing keywords or removing the entire list of keywords. So you don't have to even have type of environmental incident if you don't want it. Or you could just remove the ones that you think are not relevant to your organization. Fortunately, none of these are mandatory, so we'll skip this section. What you do have to do as the person investigating this incident is you have to define the incident. So what you've got to do is use what is typically your matrix to select the initial and residual risk ratings. Sorry, that's the potential worst case, rather. So what we've got here is apologies if you heard the phone ringing. Should have switched that off. Right. If we scroll down, what we're doing is we're filling out this information so that we can then investigate further. You notice that the status is now new report. Now, new report means, if you were doing this manually anyway, someone has come and put a form on your desk, but you haven't had the time to look at it. So what you're doing now by selecting the actual incident category, the potential worst case, is you're just doing putting some initial information into the incident report before you start doing the investigation proper. And in order to perform the investigation proper, what you have to do is press this button here that says investigate. Now, before you do that, you have to complete all of the mandatory fields. So what you can see is that when you click on buttons that actually change the status or the workflow step of the form that you're in, what it does is it checks to make sure that all of your mandatory fields are completed correctly. You'll notice that down next to investigate, there's also a save button. Now, save is different. Save means I just want to make sure I don't lose my data. And you can save at any time, and it does not check to see that you have filled in mandatory fields. But because investigate is actually going to change the status of the report, it needs to make sure that absolutely everything is hunky-dory before we move forward. So I'm going to say, is it externally reportable? No. And then I'm going to click the investigate button again. And once I click the investigate button, you can see that the status has changed from new report to open report. And if we scroll down, what you'll see, in fact, what I might do is just close this environmental section. It's just so huge. What you'll see now are some fields that weren't there before. What you've now got is a series of investigation fields that you only need to see when you're in the process of investigating. And again, some are mandatory, some are not. So let's start with these fields here, the specifics. What was task performed at the time? So we've filled that section in. We'll move on down to the investigation section and fill in some of these fields too. Once we've completed that, we'll move on down to the immediate contributing factors. Now, again, these are keywords and you can change them. After we've ticked a couple of these and put in some details, we'll move on down to the root cause section. Now, you'll notice in the root cause section, what we've got is a number of options. These have not really been fully developed, but they were placed there to give you an idea that we can do things other than use simple keywords, which again are available for you to manage. If you wanted to do something like an ICAM or something similar, you could tick on major investigation process. If we click on major investigation process, it takes us to another more detailed investigation. And while this is not exactly ICAM or anything that's really recognizable, what you can see is that we can configure this to suit some sort of activity that you might perform. So I'll exit from there. There's also a 5 why, and this is just one set of 5 why questions just to give you an idea of what could potentially be done in a 5 why type investigation. We'll stick, however, with root causes as standard keywords, and we'll just tick a couple. They might not relate entirely or even at all to the ongoing investigation. This is just to give you an idea. Put in some details and then move on to the next section. Now, in the recommendations section, what we've got here is a 1-line field. Now, that's probably not adequate. What we need to do is we need to make this a larger field, maybe 3 or 4 lines, so that we can add in multiple recommendations. Even though you can type a lot of recommendations on 1 line, it would be a lot easier to read it if you had multiple recommendations on multiple lines. However, if we put some details in here, what we want to do is follow up on these recommendations. And the way to follow up on a recommendation is to create an action that gets sent out to somebody so that they can manage that action and the person investigating the incident can track that action. The way to do this, of course, is in the links section, is to log a new action. So we'll log an action. What it does is it opens up the actions form. We can say, right, the accountable person is me, Angela, because I'm the one logging the action, although I can go and change this. I can set anybody as the accountable person. And I'll send this off to Winston Churchill. Now, you could set this up in a different way. You could set it up so that you assign it to Winston and it automatically knows who Winston's manager is and makes them the accountable person. It just depends on the way that you do things in your organization. We'll say the priority is low. Again, these are keywords. It puts in a due date, which by default is about 7 days from today's date. But again, you can simply choose any date you like from the calendar. Date completed seems a bit odd to have a date completed here when you're creating an action, but you might be creating an action that actually had been closed, so it gives you the option to do that. The action type, this is entirely up to you as keywords. We won't bother with project. We'll say the brief description is advanced driver training required. And what we might want to do down here is say there are a number of people who might be interested in what's going on with this action. So what we're able to do is we're able to select their names from a drop-down list, and every time that a submit button is pressed on this action, not only is the person at the top, the assigned person and the accountable person, going to get an email, but anybody who's in this list will also get an email and be able to see how this action is progressing. And then what you can do is you can put in some details about what's going on in this action and submit it. And because you've submitted it, if you remember, just like the vehicle register, what you now get is a table of associated actions. So you could have any number of recommendations up here, and you can create any number of associated actions down here. And whenever you want to look at them, you click on the link and look at the action. So it means that even though actions go into their own bucket over on the left-hand side here, you as the person managing the incident don't need to navigate there because you have access to it here in the incident report. And if we have a quick look at this action, we scroll down, we know we typed this previously, and what you can see, if you are happy enough to put your photograph into myosh, it will store your photograph, who you are, and the time and date that you put in any comments together with whatever comments you put in. So you've got an auditable list of comments ongoing in the action. It's a bit like an email, but auditable. And of course, the action has its own life. It has its own workflow. And again, depending on what you want from your solution, what you can do is you can close down the incident and have the actions remain open, or you could set the system up so that the incident cannot be closed until all the actions associated with it have first been closed themselves. Now, the other thing that you can do when you're lodging an incident report is you can link the incident report to associated hazards. Now, there's a hazard register. Similar to the actions, the hazard register stores all hazards regardless of where they're created from. But as the person managing the incident, if the incident has been caused by an existing hazard, what you don't want to have to do is leave the incident and go and look in the hazard register. So again, what you're able to do is click on select from the hazard register, and this is similar to selecting from the vehicle register. You've got a list of hazards, you're in a table, and tables, as you will probably remember from our first video that shows how to navigate, what you can do is you can select or filter on the types of hazards. So you might want to see all hazards that are related to plant. And you can then tick the one that you think is appropriate. You can, of course, view it over here to make sure it is the correct one. You can tick a couple of them. In fact, you can add them and submit them, and what it will do is it will now build up a list of hazards that are associated with this particular incident. The colors, I think we mentioned previously, what you're able to do is you're able to set colors according to the workflow or status of that particular document. So this is telling us with a big green tick that these hazards have actually been managed in the past. Clearly, if they're now contributing to new incidents, what you need to do is go and review them, because maybe the controls that you put in place are insufficient. So the last thing that Angela needs to do now is send this to somebody who's going to sign this particular incident off. Now, she can send it to herself, she can send it to other people. What she might do is, in this case, send it to Winston. She can put in a comment. And submit for sign-off. Now, once Winston receives it, and I haven't logged in as Winston, I'm still logged in as Angela, but she's an administrator, she can see everything. Once Winston receives it, what he will do is review the entire document. Once he's finished with the review, you'll notice down the bottom that what he's able to do is one of three things. He can sign it off, because he's happy. He can refer it to other people. So what you can do is you can circulate the incident amongst people and they can each put in a comment. You get a history of comments at the bottom. Or alternatively, you can reopen it because you're unsatisfied or dissatisfied with some aspect of the incident investigation. You put in a comment, you send it back, and that person has to resubmit it for sign-off once they've rectified the issues that you've identified. Now, at this point, that's the end of the incident report. We'll sign it off. But there are obviously some companies who would want to do more than this. They might want to, for example, add another step. Ah, see, I haven't filled in some mandatory fields. I'll have to go and do that. Okay, I've resubmitted it. I was saying, there are some companies who would potentially want to sign off an incident report, but then maybe 3 months later, they'd want to check to find out whether or not the recommendations that have been put in place were actually having a satisfactory effect and that no more incidents of a similar ilk had occurred. Now, this is simply adding another workflow step to the existing default set of workflow steps. And again, as an administrator, you can do this without any help from myosh if you so choose. Now, what we've done is we've gone through a basic set of steps to investigate an incident report. And during that process, what we did was we created some actions, or an action. If we go and have a look at the action module, we know that we created an action out of a recommendation in that incident that was something to do with advanced driver training. And because it is the last action created and that this view is sorted by action number, it actually turns out that it's the first action at the top. So we created an action out of an incident report, but it actually gets stored in the actions module, which is really handy because as a person investigating actions and looking at actions across the company, you don't now have to go into the incident report in order to see the action. Again, what we've done here is we've color-coded the actions in terms of status so that intuitively we know that this particular action is overdue. And if we go over to the far right-hand side, we can see the status that says it's overdue. Always remembering that these views are completely configurable, and we could, if we wanted to, just drag the status column into the first column if needed. Hazards the same. Here's our hazard register. We've also color-coded our hazards. And again, you can filter on hazards by workflow step or by status or by anything else that you want to do. And once again, the hazards that we created or the hazards that we linked to existed here in the first place. Any hazards that we would have created from that incident would now be sitting here as a hazard in the hazard register. And all that you're doing is you're linking from the hazard register to the incident and back. Now, I've spent a lot of time during this demonstration talking about how easy it is to modify your own environment. And I showed you briefly how you could add a field of a particular type to a form and save it. What we're going to do now is we're going to go and have a look at that administration section, and we're going to look at it in a bit more detail and see the kinds of things that you can do, including the fact that what you can do is you can give people different levels of administrator access, which means that all of the administration functionality is not left in the hands of one person. It's often quite overwhelming if you have a huge administrative task, a list of tasks to do, you sometimes never get to them. So what you can do is you can give people little parts of administration that they can do, and then you as the main administrator can just oversee it. So let's do that. What we'll do is we'll log into administration, in this case as Angela Adminson, a top-level administrator, and also as a person who has somewhat less administrative functions, and we'll compare the two. Right, so what I've done this time is I've split the screens horizontally, and in the top screen we can see we're still logged in as Angela, a top-level administrator, and down at the bottom we're logged in as Manager Martin. And Manager Martin has a standard level of administrative functionality, nowhere near as powerful as Angela has. And you can see the difference across the top. There's a whole lot more tabs that Angela has access to than anything that Martin has access to. And if we were to go and have a look, say, at managing the actions module in each of the two people, we'll open it up for Angela and do exactly the same for Martin. And what you can see is that what Martin gets is that simpler drag and drop option. And in that drag and drop option, what we saw was that there were certain fields, but there was a limited number of fields. So you can put in multi-selection checkboxes, you can put in a select field, a date, radio buttons, and a person select field. The kinds of things that you would typically want to just add as fields. But they don't give you the full range of options that you might want if you were a more experienced administrator. Now, in order to see what fields are available and the kinds of things that you could potentially do, we'll have a look at what Angela can do. So we'll just expand her form. We don't have the drag and drop, as you can see. What we still have is the hierarchy with all of the fields in it, and we're in an action module, so there are less fields. We'll expand them, and we'll have a look at the action details section. If we wanted to add a new field into the action details section, what we've got over here is the option Add Field. If we click on this, this opens up a field type form, and in the type of field over here, what we have is a drop-down list of a huge range of different field types, far more than Martin has. And what you can see is you've got things like, do I want to have a button that will effectively copy the existing form? So this is really handy if, let's say, you were doing a risk assessment. You have a whole load of risk assessments, or even a safe work method statement, and you need a new one, and you need one quickly. You don't want to have to go and build an entire risk assessment or swim. You click on a clone button, what it will do is it will copy all of the details of the existing one into another, and then you simply go and change the little bits that you need changed, and you have a new document. So that's really quite a useful thing to have. You've got multi-select checkboxes. So checkboxes, but the ability to select more than one. You have things like exporting to a Word file or to a PDF file. These are really helpful because often organizations have their own forms and they want to keep them. So what you do is you map fields in myosh to fields on a Word document, and you have a button, you press the button, and it extracts the information and puts it into the Word document. You have things like signature capture fields. So probably more appropriate when you're using an iPad. You want someone to sign their signature with their finger, or you might be able to do it if you have a screen that is a touch-sensitive screen. But if you feel that that's necessary, you can add one of those types of fields into the form. So what this does is gives you a whole lot of additional functionality that you didn't have before. The other thing that you can do, and since we spent a lot of time looking at the incident reports, it might be worthwhile going back and having a look at that again. We'll just collapse a few of these sections. If you remember, what we said when we started out with this presentation is that as a basic user, you might not want to see all of that information about injury management and vehicle management. It might just be too much for you to fill in. And I said that what you could do is control who sees what. And if you remember, those two sections were the vehicle details with all the bus information and the injury reports section where we allowed people to log new injury reports. Now the way to control this is up here in the section called Access Control. And what we're effectively saying here, if we go to Section Access, is that when the workflow step for the form is in draft status, which it is when you create a new form, we can control who it is that sees certain sections of the form. And the injury report section currently is viewable and editable. So who can see it and who can edit it by the following groups: power users, users, and advanced administrators. Now, UMA user is in the users group. That's why she can see and edit the injury report section when it's in draft status. So if we don't want people who are basic users to edit or see that, all we do is we remove them. And when we click OK and save this form, the next time a basic user like UMA user logs an incident report, she will not have to fill out any of that information about injury reports, or if we choose to, I think it was vehicle details, wherever that might be. Here. You can see here as well, in draft status, users can edit and see vehicle details. But what we did was we hid environmental impact from users. Users are not here with environmental impact, so she didn't need to fill out that section. So really, who sees what and when is under your control. Now what we'll do is we'll have a look at some of the other things that you can do, but bear in mind we are an advanced administrator, and if we just compare again what Manager Martin as a standard administrator is, and standard administration is what you get by default with the product. Advanced administration requires you to have more training. This gives you enormous functionality, but it also gives you the ability to destroy the system a lot more easily. So we require you to know exactly what's going on in this advanced administration before we just hand it over to you. You can see that there are some things that both managers can do. So they can create scheduled records, they can create record notifications, they can deal with users, hierarchies, occupations, and training management. And of course, you only see training management if you actually have a product. But Angela gets a lot more options than Manager Martin, and some of these things are very, very useful, because what it means is that for things like risk matrices and more, there is no need for you to come to us to modify your risk matrix. So what we'll do is, for the remainder of this session, we'll just go through, not everything in a heck of a lot of detail, but we'll go through some of the things that a full administrator can use. But just bear in mind, as a basic administrator, the standard level of access that you get, some of these things you cannot do. So first and foremost, what's a scheduled record? Well, a scheduled record is something that you want to create on an ongoing basis. And you might want to create, for example, repeating actions. Notifications, you want someone to do something every quarter, every year, something like that. They're very easy to create. You click New Scheduled Action. You choose the form from the drop-down lists, and there are many in this demo system. We'll stick with actions. We'll say, okay, we want to create a new action, and we'll call it, for want of a better term, scheduled action. We can then add a scheduled rule, and we can say we want this to go off monthly, weekly, annually. We'll say every month we want it to go off on the 5th of the month at 6 o'clock in the morning. And what we can now do is we can pre-fill the values of the action. So this is a form, and we now want to send this form out as a record, created document. We want to create it, and we want to send it off with the following values in it. So we want to create an accountable person. So we want Winston to be accountable, but we actually want it assigned to Dwight. It's going to have a priority of low, and the initial due date might be, I don't know, the 8th of March. Now, as we scroll down, we might not want it to be as part of a project, but we know that it's a task, and the brief description will be whatever we choose to put in there. And we also want to make sure that James Blunt gets notified whenever anything happens in this action. And then we save it. So what we've done is we've now saved a scheduled action. And every month that will now get created and sent out together with notifications to the right people. Record notifications are somewhat different. Record notifications are who gets notified when things happen in myosh and when. Now, it comes in two parts. The first part is the email template. Again, you can choose which module or form you're creating these templates from. So if we stick with actions, what we've got is a number of templates. And we have one here, the bottom one, when an action is assigned. So when someone sends you a notification to say you've got to do an action, the form that it takes is defined here. And what we've done is we've said an action has been assigned to you, followed by this strange looking field. Now what this is a bit like field replace in Word. What will happen is that when the action comes to you, you will see an action has been assigned to you, followed by whatever actually appears in the brief description field of the action. Now I might, in the subject line, also want the due date of the action, so I could type that in. Followed by the due date. And now what I'll see is it's been assigned to you, followed by the brief description. The due date is followed by the due date. The body of the action is exactly the same. You can format it rather quite easily because you have a lot of rich text formatting at the top. You can change the colors, you can change the font, and you create the template. Now that's creating the template. That's creating what the action or the notification for this particular action status looks like. It's not telling you when it goes out. You have to do that as a separate function. And what we're no longer looking at email templates. We're now looking at the notifications. And here is a notification called action assigned. So if we open that action assigned up, it's called action assigned. It's always good to get your naming conventions correct. It makes it a lot easier. So the action assigned notification uses the action assigned template, which is selected from the list of templates that we saw a moment ago. What kind of notification is it? Is it triggered? Is it timed, etc.? Who's it go to? Well, in this case, it goes to the name of the person who appears in the assigned to field in the action. And of course, you can add any option here. So you're not just limited to one person to send it to. Does there need to be a reply? In this case, no. Who's going to get a copy? In this case, the person who's in the accountable field. And how is it going to get sent? Well, if we look at the notification properties, in this case, it's going to be delivered as an email. But it could be sent out as a push notification to your phone or both. Once we've said, well, it's going by email, what makes it go? What triggers the fact that this email now gets sent? And we've said record progressed in workflow. Doesn't have to be that, but we've chosen that. It could be record data change. So you could have an action that gets sent out to somebody every time data in an action is changed. It would result in a lot of activity, but maybe that's something you want to check. You might, however, also want to check whether or not a record has been deleted and receive a notification. And you might also want to know if a value, a date field, like maybe the due date of an action, has been changed. Well, we'll stick with what we had. Record progressed in the workflow. If you say it's record progressed in the workflow, it then wants to know, well, which workflow step? This is an action. In our case, in the basic demo version of actions, there are not too many workflow steps. But if you were working in an incident report, that has quite a lot of workflow steps. So you clearly need to tell it which workflow step it's going to get triggered in. And then you click OK. And what you then have is a notification feature or function that uses the email template. So what you can see is that you can go and edit either the template or the notification function of any action or any notification for any module. If you want to change them for a different module, you simply drop down the list and say, I'd rather look at the ones for incident reporting, and here they all are. You have complete control. Okay, so if we move across to the right-hand side, we click on Risk Matrix. This is only something that's available to an advanced administrator. What you have is control over every aspect of your risk matrix. If you want to change the text for a particular value, you hover over it, you put your mouse in the keyword, and you now have control over that text. If we click on Users, because you're an advanced administrator, you have more control over users than you do as a basic administrator or a standard administrator. We'll just go in and have a quick look at, say, Jane Arnold. What we've got in here is the ability to add in Jane's information. And bear in mind, for large companies, you probably wouldn't need to do this anyway, because there would be an API that would connect to their payroll system and push this information into myosh. Whenever there was a new person created, or if a person moved or left the business, all of that information would be updated via the API. But you still have this manual function should you need it. There are, however, some features that, despite the fact that you have an API, you would like to manage. And those might be changing the person's password, if need be. Probably don't need to do this, because the person themselves could log in up here, click on their name, and a drop-down list would give them the option to change the password, but you can do it. The other thing that you can do is you can add people to groups. Now, if you remember, user, who we logged in as first, was a member of the user group, just like Jane Arnold. If I wanted Jane Arnold to be more than a basic user, all I need to do is add her to additional groups. So if I wanted to make her a basic administrator, I just make her part of the basic administrator group. She would still be a basic user when she's logging incident reports, but she'd then be able to click on the administration section and come in and do whatever you had defined for a basic administrator. The other thing that you can do is you can limit people to see only the parts of the business that you want them to see. So what we've got here is hierarchy access. If I click on hierarchy access and I decide that I only want Jane to see the production and the sales divisions, I click OK, and when I save this down the bottom, what she can now see is only anything that has something to do with those divisions. And you've effectively hidden the rest of the company's information from her. And this applies to the dashboard as well. We'll have a look at groups. Now, although you do have access to groups as a basic administrator, and we'll just show that again. If we go into a user, and we look at, say, Roy as the basic administrator, I am able to add Roy to additional groups. But what I don't have access to is the groups themselves. So Angela, with advanced administrator features, can not only have a look at the groups that exist, but she can also create new groups. There's a new group button. We won't create a new group. We'll go and have a look at an existing group. Let's look at that basic administrator group. What I'm able to do as an advanced administrator is I'm able to add people to the groups from inside the group itself. Whereas as a basic administrator, I'm only allowed to open a person document and add groups to the person document. So if I wanted Jason and James to become administrators, I can do that. Click Save, and suddenly I have 2 new basic administrators. What this does up here in the admin access is this shows us what sort of functionality basic administrators actually get. Now, what we typically do is we control this. We would, during a configuration meeting, discuss with you what the requirements were for a basic administrator, and then set these I wouldn't say in stone, but we would set them and we would prevent personnel from your organization from ever changing it. Because what you don't want to do is go through a long configuration session, set this all up, and then have someone from within inside your organization come and just add features to people and allow them to do things that you wouldn't want them to do ordinarily. Hierarchies, you can build your own hierarchies. So what you're able to do is add in any new hierarchy that might appear. Now this doesn't happen very often, but does occasionally with government institutions, typically on the change of a government here in Australia. Hierarchies either get changed to some new name or some new hierarchy element gets added. And what you're able to do, if we go and have a look at, say, site, is you can add in the names of all the different sites. And what you can do here is you can click on depends on parent. Now, if I click depends on parent, what this means is that I can go into the department, which is the parent of site because it's the one above. I can select the department and I can define which of these sites applies to each department value. And then I can say within department, depends on parent, and I can do the same for division. So what you get is that cascading effect of hierarchies, and you don't see every value in every hierarchy when you click on a top value. Occupations is simply that, a list of occupations, and training management is something that only applies to organizations that have training management. Now, one last thing that I'd like to have a quick look at is how you can change workflow steps within a module or within a form within a module. And a good one to look at is the incident report form because it's so large. There's an element here within the report form called workflow definition. And in the workflow definition, you've got all of the steps and which step follows a previous step. And if you wanted to create a new workflow step, you've got the ability to build them here. So this goes back to the difference between what a basic administrator and an advanced administrator can do. And it also is the reason why we really do need you to have additional training in order to have access to this section. We just have a look at compare the two again. What you can see here is that as an advanced administrator, I have all of this functionality relating to, in this case, an incident report form. Whereas down the bottom, as the basic administrator, all I have is the drag and drop functionality. I don't have any of this additional functionality. And I don't have any of that ability to control the access to sections that we reviewed when we first started looking at administration. So to finish off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at some of these features that are within a form that enable you as an advanced administrator to configure pretty much everything related to an incident report form. So we've finished with the record definition. What we want here is the record list. And I think the best way to demonstrate this is to have to split the screen again and show you what you're actually doing in administration and how it actually affects what you see as a basic user. So let me do that. Right, so what we've got on the right hand side is me logged in as Angela, the advanced administrator, and on the left we've got Manager Martin logged in as a user. And we're logged into the incident reporting module, which is what we're editing over here on the right hand side. What I've clicked on is the record list. Now the record list is actually the view that you see when you go into a module for the first time. And what this is saying is what columns are going to be in the default record list. So if you look here, I'm looking at user views up here on the left, and I'm looking at the default user view. And this default user view contains columns. And these columns are over here on the right-hand side, defined for me in this record list. If I look back onto the left, but on the right-hand side of the leftmost window, I've got these three little horizontal lines. And when I drop down these horizontal lines, I have additional columns that I can add into the view. So, for example, if I wanted to see the supervisor, what it would do is it would add the supervisor column into the view. If I don't want to see it, uncheck it, it takes it away. Now this list of additional columns is also configurable, and that is provided for over here. If we move across to calendar view, probably more appropriate a calendar view in actions than it is in incidents. So what we'll do is we'll open the actions module over on the left-hand side. And you'll notice that in the actions module, there's an option here that says calendar. Now that option only appears if over on the right, I have checked this little checkbox here. As a result of checking it, what I can do is I can click on the calendar view and it will switch from a record view to a calendar view. Now there's not much here at the moment, so if I go back a couple of months, this is September last year when there were an awful lot of actions happening. So I can now view my actions as a calendar rather than as a record list, which might be something that's easier to view. Of course, if I want to get back to that record list, all I need to do is click record list. Now over on the right hand side, if we keep moving to the right, we've now got notification badges. Notification badges are actually these little items, these little round circles with numbers in them. And you can see when I hover over them, it actually shows me the documents for that particular module that I have to deal with. And by clicking on them, what it will do is open the document. But I can configure what actually gets displayed in the list. So down in this section here, what I can see is that the field brief description, so the brief description of the incident, appears when I hover over it. What it's also saying is, well, who gets to see these and when? So if we look up here, it tells us that the alert is displayed for the supervisor when it's in open report status. It's displayed for the reporting person when it's in draft status. And you can add whatever you require here depending on the functionality within your organization. If we look further to the right, on the right hand side of the screen as you look at it, we click on search. This determines what you see when you search for something. We click on mobile. What this does is determines whether or not the module in question, in this case, or the form in question, in this case, incident reporting form, actually appears on your mobile app. If you don't want it to appear, you just uncheck it. And lastly, the dashboard. Do you want this form to appear on the dashboard? Do you want anything about this form appearing on your dashboard at all? A tick box is all that's required. Now, this illustrates why you need to have additional training, because we can't have anybody with advanced level administrator access coming in here and unchecking the fact that incident reporting is disabled on the dashboard. All of a sudden, everybody receiving reports or looking at the dashboard would see nothing. And there would be no one within the organization who would actually have any reason, have any clue as to why that had occurred. So these are additional features that only a powerful and knowledgeable administrator should have. And as mentioned previously, you would have to go through an additional training or level of training in order to be given this functionality. Well, hopefully that gives you a really good idea of what there is available. And if you have any queries, if you need any further information, just get hold of us at myosh and we'll be pleased to either give you another demo or provide you with answers via email. Thanks very much.